Welcome back to Fear Begins, a step into the darkness where every story pulls you closer to the unknown. In today's episode, I'm sharing 8 true and deeply unsettling encounters from the Appalachian Mountains, a place where the silence of the woods hides more than just wildlife. Have you ever wondered what it means when a red cloth appears outside your tent even though you never placed it there? Or why a fire tower 30 feet above the ground can feel less safe than the forest floor itself? Tonight, we're peeling back the shadows of the Appalachians, and what you hear might stay with you far longer than you expect. So make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and share this with friends who dare to listen. Now let's begin. I was 17 that summer, the summer everything at home finally boiled over. My parents could not breathe the same air without erupting into an argument. Money, chores, the volume of the TV, who forgot the toothpaste, every small thing turned into a war. Most nights I would park in the driveway after school and just sit in the car, hoping they would calm down before I stepped inside. But they never did. The house was a constant battleground. One night, after my dad slammed a chair so hard it splintered against the wall, I texted my mom from upstairs, told her I needed to leave for a while. She just typed back, "Okay, be safe." No questions, no hesitation. My Uncle Travis had a cabin out near Franklin, West Virginia. No GPS pin, no marked roads, just deep in the woods where nobody bothered you. I had only been there once as a kid. I remembered thinking it was boring. But at 17, boring sounded like heaven. Travis was not the type to talk much. He picked me up from the bus station, chewing sunflower seeds, spitting into an old bottle without a word. When we reached the cabin, it looked smaller than I remembered. The wood siding had gone gray, the screen door slapped in the wind on a single hinge. A porch swing hung with only one chain, swaying crooked. Inside it was just 2 rooms and a bathroom. A wood stove sat in the corner. The kitchen looked like no one had touched it in years. The whole place smelled faintly of burned wood and stale coffee. I noticed a dog bowl by the sink. Travis caught me looking. "Had a mutt, died years ago," he said flatly, then added, "Don't follow the carved trees, don't stay out after dark, and don't go west." No explanation, just rules. He lit a cigarette and walked off. The days blurred together. With no cell service, no TV, no radio, I filled the silence with long walks. The woods rolled endlessly, hills folding into hills until I could not tell which way I came from. Sometimes I stopped just to listen, but there was nothing. No birds, no squirrels, no movement, as if the whole forest was holding its breath. Then came the bones, small ones at first, a rabbit skull, a bird's fragile ribs, later, bigger ones, a raccoon skeleton. Every one picked clean, perfectly white, carefully placed just off the trail as if arranged. But it was the carvings that stayed in my head, symbols cut deep into tree bark, not hearts or initials. Strange things, overlapping triangles, spidery lines, circles within circles. One looked like 2 stick figures holding hands, their heads marked with X's. Sometimes black handprints surrounded them, small, like a child's, and they moved. One day a carving was on a tree along the path, the next it was gone, or on a completely different tree. At dinner one night, over eggs burned on purpose. I asked him what they meant. He muttered without looking up, "Don't touch, don't follow, don't ask again." That was the longest thing he had said to me in days. One morning before dawn, I couldn't sleep. I grabbed some jerky, a flashlight, and wandered farther than before, down a narrow trail. I had not seen the entrance marked by 2 trees burned hollow from the inside out. The trail curved strangely, like it wanted me to walk in circles. Then it opened into a clearing. In the center was a perfect stone circle, 20 feet wide, evenly spaced rocks forming an unbroken ring. Inside, nothing, no leaves, no grass, no bugs, only bare dirt. And in the middle stood a pale tree stump, too cleanly cut, too new, not like anything around it. From above hung a rope, thick, frayed, ending in a noose. It swayed lightly, not from the wind, because there was none, but like someone had touched it moments before I turned. And he was there. No shoes, skin stretched tight like dried leather. Shirt stained dark down the collar and chest, ribs sticking out. His pale eyes too wide, unblinking. He sniffed the air slowly, each inhale rattling in his chest like broken glass. His feet were not standing on the moss but sinking into it, toes curling into the dirt. All I could whisper was, "Sorry." Like I had walked into the wrong room. He lifted one finger and pointed to the stump. That broke me. I ran, smashing through branches, tearing skin on rocks, sliding down hills, losing my backpack, my food, even my flashlight. I did not stop until I recognized the clearing by the cabin. Sun setting fast, lungs burning. Travis was on the porch, shotgun in hand, not raised, just watching. I gasped, "How do you know?" And he said only, "You stepped into the wrong circle." No explanation. That night, silence stretched until I heard footsteps at the edge of the trees. Long, slow strides crushing leaves deliberately. Then a voice, "Mason," it whispered. My mother's voice, broken and strained. "Help me, I am lost." I started toward the window. But Travis grabbed my wrist hard, shook his head, then covered my mouth when I opened it. The voice circled the cabin all night. "Mason, please, I need you." It shifted sides like it was searching for a way in. Too perfect, too rehearsed. As if something wore my mother's voice like a mask. At dawn, the whispers stopped outside. The ground was marked with footprints, bare, wide-toed, circling the cabin, stopping under my window before vanishing into nothing. I packed my bag that afternoon. Travis drove me back to the bus station. Before I got out, he muttered, "You were lucky," then drove away. I never told my parents the truth, just said I got homesick. They did not ask questions. 10 years passed. I moved twice, built a normal life, yet the memory of that cabin never left. It lingers like a dream that feels too real to ignore, and some nights when the world goes quiet, I still hear my mother's voice calling from the trees. My name is James. I was 26 when I decided I needed to escape from everything. Not a breakdown, not a midlife crisis, but the kind of exhaustion that crawls under your skin and makes every light and every voice feel too loud. I wanted silence. I wanted to feel like the world wasn't reaching for me every second of the day. So I made a plan, a week alone on the Appalachian Trail. Not the entire stretch, of course, just a manageable loop starting near Elkridge, north Carolina, winding its way back toward a place called Blinn Hollow, remote enough to avoid tourists, close enough to escape if things went wrong. I didn't tell anyone much. I told my boss I was taking time off, sent my sister a quick note saying I'd be off-grid. That was it. No social media posts, no GPS tracking, no long emotional goodbyes. The whole point was to disappear for a while. The first few days gave me exactly what I wanted. Silence so heavy you could hear your own heartbeat. Miles of trail, winding through endless green. It's strange what you start to notice when the world around you goes quiet. The way moss changes color depending on the angle of light. The way tree bark feels against your shoulder when you lean on it. Even the air feels sharper, like every breath carries weight. I was sore, but it was the good kind of sore. My meals were freeze-dried, tasteless, but sitting under a tarp with the sound of flowing water nearby, even those meals felt like something to be grateful for. I was careful, maybe too careful. I hung my food every night, marked maps with backup routes, and kept mental notes of emergency exits. I wasn't reckless. I was in control, or at least I thought I was on the fourth night. I set up camp near a dried creek bed, 10 miles north of Devil's Thread Gap. The spot felt perfect, a natural windbreak from the rocks. Enough flat ground to stretch out. I boiled water, opened one of those powdered lasagna meals, and sat on a rotting log scrolling through a book on my phone. That's when it hit me. The smell, sharp, chemical, like rust mixed with battery acid, with something foul underneath, something rotten. The kind of scent that doesn't just wrinkle your nose. It tells your brain something is wrong. I thought maybe an animal had died nearby. I searched the brush, climbed the slope above me, scanned the tree line. Nothing. No body, no scavenger birds, no disturbed ground. The woods were still too still. I forced myself to eat, shoved everything away, double-checked my bare hang, and zipped myself into the tent before the sun was even down. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, one crunch at a time through dry leaves. Not frantic like an animal, not cautious, like a deer. Just steady, measured, human. The steps circled the tent once, perfectly slow, perfectly even. Then they stopped. Right behind my head, I didn't move. My hand clutched a knife under the sleeping bag until my fingers went numb. My chest was so tight I barely breathed. The silence pressed in, heavier than the darkness. When the gray light of morning finally broke, I checked the ground. There were footprints. Not mine, smooth soles, almost like old leather shoes. And the toes pointed slightly inward, a small detail. But it sent a chill through me. There was something wrong about the way this person walked. I packed up quickly, skipped breakfast, skipped stretching, and walked. My legs screamed. But I didn't stop. The smell followed me, faint at first, then stronger, waves of rust, rot, and something oddly sweet. Like fruit left too long in the sun. The forest shouldn't smell like that. And nothing dead should follow you for 10 miles. That night, I set camp on a ridge, sparse trees, a wide view in every direction. I thought it would make me feel safer. It didn't. I skipped fire, skipped food, and sat in the tent with that same knife in my hand around 2 in the morning. I woke again, breathing, slow and steady, human, right beyond the tree line. Not moving closer, not leaving, just watching. Then the steps began, crunch, crunch, coming directly toward the tent. I saw the silhouette through the thin fabric, tall, lean, holding something long in its hand, a staff, maybe a pole. He stopped right outside, raised the stick, and tapped once against the tent, just once, a single knock, like tapping a fingernail against glass. Then he turned and walked away. The smell lingered long after. By dawn I was already packed. I abandoned my route and headed for a maintenance road. Anything to lead me closer to civilization. Late that afternoon, barely able to stand, I found an old hunting shack, half collapsed, rotting wood. Barely 3 walls holding together. Inside the doorway, names were carved into the frame. Dozens of them. Some were initials, some full names, each marked with a date. The most recent was from only 3 days earlier. Beneath it was a blank space, waiting. I spent the night in that shack. Knife clutched so hard it felt welded to my palm. Every creak outside made me certain he was back, waiting for darkness to swallow the woods. But he never came at first light. I left and hours later stumbled across a ranger truck. My clothes torn, my body weak. I told him I'd seen a bear, got lost trying to avoid it. He didn't question me, and I didn't explain more. When I got home, I sold everything, my gear, my maps, even my water filter. I haven't set foot on a trail since. I always thought I was decent in the woods, not an expert, but not clueless either. I camped often, hiked plenty, and never lost my cool over every twig snapping in the dark. So when my cousin Ben invited me to spend a week at his family's place near Waverly, Virginia last August, I did not think twice about it. His family owned a big log cabin tucked so deep in the trees, it felt like the world ended at their backyard. No neighbors, no cell signal, no faint glow from town, just endless forest pressing in on every side. Like civilization had stopped and been swallowed by nature. Ben and I grew up spending summers together. Even after college started, we kept that tradition. We were both 20 now, old enough to be adults, but when we got together, it was like nothing changed. Same dumb jokes, same competitions over gas station snacks, same playful arguments about whose school was more soul-crushing. By the 3rd day, though, boredom crept in. No Wi-Fi, no girls, no entertainment besides the endless silence of the woods. You can only play so much Mario Kart before you start going insane. That was when Ben mentioned the fire tower, casually. Like it was nothing. He said it was about 3 miles past Ridgepoint Bluff. Sketchy but still standing. A place where you could see the entire county from the top. He threw it out mid-lunch. While biting into a grilled cheese, I stopped chewing. Staring at him, "You've been there?" "Once, sophomore year," he said. "Night hike. Scared the hell out of me, but unforgettable." The idea of hiking unmarked woods at night already felt like a bad setup to a horror story. But Ben just shrugged. "Come on, man, we've done worse. I brought headlamps. We can even camp on the platform, cook, do the whole wilderness bonding thing." I hesitated, but only for a second. He was right. We had done dumber things. Plus, I did not want to be the one who backed out of something that sounded epic. So around 8:30 that evening, we packed what little we needed. Ben stuffed 2 thin sleeping bags, a tiny camp stove, some instant ramen, and an old tent just in case. I brought 2 flashlights, a lighter, a water bottle, and the folding knife my uncle gave me. That knife, more than anything, made me feel better. Like maybe I could handle whatever was waiting out there. We set off just before 9. The sun had almost disappeared, but there was still a streak of light clinging to the horizon. Enough to make out shapes. The trail, if you could call it that, began behind the cabin and dove immediately into a dark tunnel of trees. It was narrow, uneven, the kind of path only deer could make. Every few steps I had to push branches aside or trip over roots buried in the dirt. One root caught me so bad I nearly face-planted 5 minutes in. "Should have worn shin guards," I muttered. Ben just laughed. "Welcome to nature's gym." After that, we barely spoke. The woods had a way of silencing us. It was not until then that I realized how used I was to noise. There were no crickets, no frogs, not even mosquitoes buzzing. Just our footsteps crunching and the occasional brush of leaves when we passed too close to a branch. The silence was suffocating, like being underwater. Then, out of nowhere, we stumbled across a rusted truck. It leaned sideways against a tree. Windows shattered, vines twisting through the grill, moss swallowing the hood. It looked like it had been dropped there decades ago and forgotten. Ben nodded like it was nothing. "Some old logging truck," he said. "Been there forever, never hauled out." We both joked nervously that it looked like the start of every horror movie. The kind of scene where you just know someone will not make it to the credits. Half an hour later, we found something worse. Hanging from a low branch was what I thought. At first was a wind chime, but when we got closer, I realized it was bones. Small ones, maybe birds, maybe rodents, strung together with dirty twine, tied with feathers, and smudged with what looked disturbingly like dried red paint. I froze. "What the hell is this?" Ben squinted. "My dad told me locals sometimes make these protection charms, Appalachian witchcraft stuff." The thing spun slowly, even though there was no breeze, turning like invisible hands were pushing it, like it was pointing directly at us. I hated it. We pushed on, but the deeper we went, the stronger the feeling grew that we had crossed into a place we did not belong. By the time the fire tower appeared through the treetops, it was already past midnight. The tower loomed above the forest like the skeleton of some giant. Rusted metal, missing stairs, bent beams. The base was swallowed by weeds and brush. The stairway looked one wrong step away from collapse. I gave Ben a look. "You sure this thing's safe?" he grinned. "Only one way to find out." We climbed, step by step, railings trembling under our hands. Some steps bent under our weight. Others were missing completely, forcing me to leap across gaps with my stomach twisting. But eventually, we reached the top. The platform sagged in places. The little hut reeked of mold and animal musk, probably raccoons living in it. We spread out our bags on the open platform instead, cooked ramen on the tiny stove, and sat under the stars for a while. It almost felt magical. Just silence, sky, and the faint crackle of boiling noodles. Then came the sound, a crunch below us, soft, deliberate, too heavy for a squirrel, too controlled for a deer. Ben snapped his light off instantly. "Don't move," he whispered. "Step, pause, step, pause." The sound circled the tower, once, then again. Slow and deliberate, like something was inspecting us. My chest ached from holding my breath. My heart pounded in my ears. I counted each step, 12, 13, 14, then silence. I do not know how long we stayed like that. Could have been minutes, could have been an hour. Eventually, I convinced myself it was a hiker or maybe a hunter. At some point, I drifted off. But when I woke, something was wrong. Ben's sleeping. Bag was empty, the zipper undone. I sat up, called his name. No response. I crept to the edge and aimed my light down. At the base of the tower stood a figure. Not Ben. It was tall, impossibly thin. Its arms hanging too low, bending the wrong way. The head tilted, not in curiosity, but at an angle that looked broken, twisted. Then I heard Ben's voice from the trees. "Josh, I need help." It was too perfect, too clear, empty, like a recording. Then again, same words, same exact tone. "Josh, I need help." My knife was in my hand before I realized I had grabbed it. My body trembled. The figure at the base did not move. Then it began to climb, not the stairs, but the beams. Its limbs stretched unnaturally, fingers clutching iron, moving in silence. It was already halfway up when I heard Ben again, but this time his voice was real, desperate. "Josh." The thing stopped, then dropped like it had been cut from strings. Vanished into the darkness below. Seconds later, Ben stumbled out of the trees, pale, his flashlight shaking in his hand. "Go," he screamed. "We have to go now." The stairs were broken, so we slid down the beams, scraped our hands raw, and hit the ground running. Branches whipped our faces as we tore through the woods. We did not stop until dawn. When we reached the cabin, Ben slammed the door shut and locked it tight. Only then did he tell me what happened. He had gotten up to pee and saw it. At first, he thought it was me, but the way it moved, jerky and broken, proved otherwise. Then it stepped behind a tree and disappeared. I was 23 the first time I ever tried solo camping in the Blue Ridge Mountains. I had gone on plenty of weekend hikes before, usually with friends, sometimes close to home. A day trip here, an overnight there, with a fire, too much junk food, and too many stories told too late. But those trips were always about hanging out as much as they were about hiking, half trail and half laughter. This time was different. I had just walked away from a job I hated, the kind of work that drains the life out of you. I was also dragging myself through the fog of a breakup. I kept telling people I just needed a break, but deep down, I knew what I wanted, to prove I could handle being completely alone. 4 days, no reception, no screens, no distractions, just me, my gear, and whatever was waiting out there in the woods. The spot I picked was a place most people never even hear of, outside a tiny forgotten town called Ledger's Gap. It barely shows up on maps. The kind of name that looks like a typo no one bothered to fix. I found it buried in a hiker's forum. Some old-timer mentioned it was peaceful, never crowded, a place you could go and not see another soul for days. That sounded perfect, maybe too perfect. I packed my car the night before, stripped things down to the essentials: tent, water filter, freeze-dried meals, knife, first aid kit. Even a paperback mystery novel I'd been meaning to finish for months. I left my phone in airplane mode, told my sister where I'd be, and brought an old printed ranger map. No GPS, no apps, no help but myself. When I stopped for gas just outside of Ledger's Gap, I asked the cashier if the Firebrush Trail was still open. He barely looked at me, just nodded once and muttered, "Yeah, always open." No smile, no warning, just a flat reply. It felt off, but I shrugged it off as small-town awkwardness. The trailhead was nothing more than a gravel pull-off, a sun-faded wooden post with a sign that read, "No maintenance beyond this point." No ranger kiosk, no parking lot, no other cars. It felt forgotten, almost abandoned. I tightened my pack straps, locked my car, and stepped forward. The first miles were peaceful. the kind of beauty that tricks you into thinking you're safe. Tall trees with moss-covered trunks, low shrubs brushing against my legs, the smell of damp earth and fallen leaves. Occasionally I'd hear the tap of a woodpecker, the quick scurry of a squirrel, but otherwise silence. By late afternoon, I had hiked nearly 6 miles. I set up camp near a creek, flat ground, soft soil, clear water. It was perfect. I pitched my tent, filtered water, boiled a pouch of chili, and leaned back against a log, boots off, listening to the trickle of the stream. That night was uneventful, calm even. I read a few chapters by headlamp and let sleep take me, lulled by the rhythm of water and leaves whispering above me. The second morning, I decided to hike light. There was a rocky overlook marked on the map about 2 miles up the ridge, so I left the tent behind, brought only a day pack with snacks, water, and the map, just to be safe. I tore strips from an old red t-shirt and tied them to branches every 100 yards or so. My way of marking the trail back. The climb was tougher than I expected, steep and narrow, but eventually I reached the overlook, and it was worth it. Nothing but green ridges rolling into the horizon, endless, alive but also crushingly silent. I sat on a rock, ate granola and jerky, and just listened to nothing. When I returned around 2 in the afternoon, that's when I saw it, 20 feet. From my tent, tied to a branch at shoulder height, was a strip of red cloth, same color as mine, but not one I had tied. I knew immediately. My knots were quick loops. This one was tight, deliberate, almost practiced. The fabric looked darker, too dirt-stained, maybe wet. I stood frozen, staring at it, trying to rationalize. Maybe I forgot. Maybe I tied it without realizing. But I knew the truth. I hadn't been near that part of camp, and this one was new. It hadn't been there before. That night I didn't bother with dinner. I zipped myself inside the tent as soon as the sun went down, knife in reach. Every rustle outside sounded louder. Every shift of wind made me flinch. Nothing touched the tent, but I barely slept. By morning, I had decided. The ranger map mentioned an old shelter cabin 8 miles deeper in, maybe with 4 walls, maybe even a lock. If someone was messing with me, they wouldn't expect me to go farther. 2 hours in, the forest felt strange, quiet, heavy. The birds had stopped. Even my own steps sounded muted. And then, movement ahead. Light steps, too soft for deer, too smooth for raccoon. I called out, "Hello," but nothing answered. The trail split ahead, left up a ridge, right down into thicker valley, and that's when I saw it. Another strip of red cloth tied up the left path, the same knot, the same placement. I didn't hesitate. I turned right and pushed on without looking back. The shelter cabin was barely standing, a crooked door, a dented tin roof. One single room, but it had walls, it had a bolt, and that was enough. Inside it smelled of old smoke and mice. There was a broken broom, a rusty can of beans, a pile of leaves in the corner. I slid the bolt, lit a candle, and sat against the wall, knife in hand. I didn't read. I didn't eat. I just listened. Around midnight, it came. 2 slow knocks on the outer wall. Not branches, not wind. Knuckles. I held my breath, waited. Minutes crawled by. Then the door creaked. Just slightly, wood straining, like someone leaned against it. And then let go. Silence followed. I stayed frozen for hours, until dawn light began to slip through the cracks. Then I grabbed my pack and bolted. I didn't lace my boots. I didn't eat. I just ran, nearly 10 miles without stopping. When I reached the trailhead, my car was still there. I leaned against it, gasping, staring back into the tree line like something might follow me out. As I pulled onto the road, I saw it again. The old Ledger's Gap welcome sign nailed to a post. The one I hadn't even noticed when I first arrived, standing there, like it had been waiting all along. I used to spend nearly every other weekend hiking deep into the woods. It was my escape, my quiet retreat away from buzzing phones, honking cars, and the endless chatter of people. The world behind me always felt heavy, but out there in the wilderness, it was just me and the silence. The trails that wound through Bell Ridge Hollow in West Virginia felt like my own secret corner of the earth. Untouched, hidden, and forgotten. I would park my car near an old cattle gate, the kind with sagging chains dangling like tired arms. I would sling on my pack, take a deep breath of cool air, and begin climbing. That day felt like all the others. The morning air was crisp with just enough breeze to keep the spring warmth in check. About 2 hours in the logging road split into a fork. The path looked oddly groomed, as if someone had been shaping it deliberately. I decided to follow the right trail, and that was when I first saw it, a cairn, waist high. The stones stacked with unsettling precision, balanced almost too neatly, and resting at the very top was a shard of red glass, flat, gleaming, positioned perfectly so it caught the light like an unblinking eye staring straight at me. I circled it slowly, trying to make sense of why it was there. No trail marker, no sign, no reason, just that strange piece of glass glaring up at me. I felt uneasy but brushed it off, told myself to keep moving. Half an hour later I found another one, identical in shape and height, only this time sap was trickling down one side of the stones, syrupy and slow, glistening like tears sliding down. A face. The sight made me freeze in place. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe sap had dripped onto the rocks by chance. Nothing supernatural, nothing strange, just nature being messy. Still, the image stayed with me. I settled in a dry stream. Bed for lunch. The gravel pressing against my shorts, but the spot felt open and safe enough. I unwrapped a granola bar, the honey and oats crumbling between my fingers, and then I chewed slowly on beef jerky, my usual ritual. That was when I noticed my GPS watch. It had frozen. The display showed me back near the road from 30 minutes earlier. Full bars, no explanation, no glitch that made sense. I rebooted it, and the screen flickered back to life. But from that moment on, the forest felt sharper, more aware of me than before. Every twig snapping sounded louder. Every branch creaked, though the air was still. Even my own footsteps felt amplified. I zipped up my jacket and picked up the pace, though I could not shake the sense that I was not walking alone anymore. Soon enough, I reached the third cairn, but this one carried something new. No red glass this time. Instead, a strip of faded flannel was tied tightly around the base stone, the fabric worn and patterned with red and blue squares. I had seen that same style in old photos at the Bell Ridge Museum, the kind miners wore in the 1930s. I crouched, reached toward it, and then crack. A branch snapped behind me, loud and sharp like a gunshot. I spun around, my chest pounding, scanning every tree. But there was nothing. Only the silence pressing back at me. I forced myself to move, glancing at my watch. The time was close to 2:15 p.m., that heavy dead zone of the afternoon when the woods feel suffocating. I shoved the tracker deep into my pocket and walked faster, determined to reach the ridge and head back. But the forest had other plans. Just past a cluster of old oak trees, the ground dropped away into a hollow that wasn't on any map. The air shifted, damp and heavy, like rain had soaked this place alone while the rest of the trail stayed dry. I descended slowly, following narrow deer trails, but the deeper I went, the stranger everything became. Moss clung thick to rocks, forming unnatural shapes, and some stones looked carved, angles too sharp, too deliberate to be natural. That was when I saw it, a cabin tucked between the trees. At first I thought it was abandoned like the others I had seen in these woods, but this one felt wrong. The roof was blackened with layers of soot as if smoke had coated it for decades. The windows were so filthy, they looked like dark mirrors. No glass, no reflection, just grime. But what froze me were the footprints. One set, clear and deep, pressing into the earth as though someone had just been there. I should have turned back then, but I did not. I crept closer, circling behind the cabin, and that was when I found them. Crosses, maybe 7, maybe 9. Planted in a muddy patch of ground, each made of splintered wood with small piles of stones stacked at their base. Fresh sap dripped down some of them, sticky and wet, and scattered around the crosses, shards of that same red glass buried in the soil, arranged deliberately like part of some ritual. The sight twisted my stomach, and before I could turn away, I noticed something else at first. I thought it was a carving, a strange wooden dog-shaped figure leaning against a tree stump, but then it moved, its head lifting. Slowly, its body shifting in the wrong way. The legs were too long, too thin, the muzzle stiff and lifeless. Its glassy eyes locked onto mine. I could not breathe. My blood thundered in my ears. It tilted its head as if studying me, curious. And then it turned and vanished into the trees. No sound, no trace, just gone. I bolted, running without direction. The forest twisted and bent around me. Landmarks repeating, every path leading me back, until I stumbled upon the first cairn again, only. This time the red glass was gone. In its place was something far worse. A circle of human teeth arranged neatly on top, some large, some small, all scrubbed clean. The white enamel gleaming against the dark stones. My stomach lurched, my bile rose, and I vomited into the leaves. I screamed, my voice breaking against the silence of the woods. No answer came back. Just emptiness. I sprinted, tearing downhill. My GPS dead, my phone flickering before cutting out completely. I pushed harder until my lungs burned. At last, the cattle gate came into view, but something stopped me cold. Sitting on a stump nearby was a pair of boots, identical to mine, brand new, untouched, and filled to the brim with clear water. And inside one of them, a Polaroid photograph. I pulled it out with trembling hands, nearly spilling the water just to steady myself. The picture showed me, sitting in that stream bed eating lunch, captured from behind. Someone had been watching. Silently, closely, I dropped it and ran. I did not stop until I was inside my car, hands shaking so hard I could barely fit the keys into the ignition. I floored it down the gravel road without ever looking back. 10 miles later, I collapsed inside. A roadside diner, wood-paneled walls, flickering lights, the smell of old grease in the air. I stared at a cup of coffee I could not drink. The waitress asked if I was all right, but all I could whisper was, "I need a ride." Nothing else. Not about the crosses, not about the cabin, not about the thing in the woods. That night I scrubbed every inch of my clothes, my boots, my pack, as if I could wash the memory away. I checked my locks again and again, left the lights on until morning, staring at the blinds, waiting for movement. In the dark, 2 days later, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. Inside was another Polaroid. The same stream bed, the same lunch, but this time closer, tighter, aimed directly at my face. I never opened it again. I just stared. That was the final straw. I sold my place near Bell Ridge Hollow and left West Virginia behind. Now I only hike marked trails, never alone, never off the path. And if I see a cairn where it should not be, I turn around and leave immediately. By October, I found myself deep in western North Carolina. Rolling green hills stretched endlessly, forests blanketed in mist, every ridge fading into the next. At first, I stayed near the state parks, safe and familiar, but once the air cooled and the weekend crowds vanished, I started slipping away from the marked paths, searching for quiet places where no one else seemed to go. The fewer people I saw, the more space I had to breathe, and the more the woods began to feel like mine. One gray afternoon, I stopped at a lonely gas station tucked along a curve of the highway. Just one pump, a rusting canopy, and silence pressing in from the trees. Inside, I asked the clerk if he knew any hidden trails worth exploring. He gave me a half smile that carried something unspoken, and with a casual tone, he mentioned an old trail off the Blue Ridge Parkway. He added, "Not many folks go out there," but the way he said it felt like both a warning and a secret. That was all I needed to hear, curiosity already outweighing caution. I reached the trailhead late that Friday. The entrance was gravel and shadow, a sagging wooden sign almost unreadable, like time had rubbed away the letters. There was only one other car there. A battered red Subaru with a cracked taillight and a faded sticker about rescue dogs clinging to its bumper. Dust coated the hood thick enough to suggest it hadn't moved in days. Maybe weeks. It looked abandoned, but I shrugged it off, parked beside it, and shouldered my pack. The path rose steeply at first, the incline burning into my legs as if the forest wanted to test me before allowing me deeper. After the first mile, the trail twisted into switchbacks. Weaving through oak and hickory, their branches tangled above like ropes binding the sky. With every step, the world grew quieter, birdsong thinned, the breeze softened. Even the usual sense of moss and soil felt muted. It was like the forest itself was holding its breath. I hiked until I found a clearing by a thin stream. The ground flat, soft, perfect for a tent. The air carried a crisp bite, enough to sting my nose, but not unbearable. I cooked ramen on my small stove, leaned back against my pack, and stared at stars that looked closer than ever, their light piercing through the branches like watchful eyes. Wrapped in that hush, I thought I had found peace. But peace never lasts. Not in these woods. Near midnight, I snapped awake. No dream, no sound, just a sudden bolt of awareness that made my heart race. The tent walls didn't move. The clearing was still, and yet I knew I wasn't alone. Then it came, this sound, faint but deliberate, steps pressing down on dry leaves maybe 20 feet away. Heavy, steady, too controlled to be an animal. One step, pause, another step, then silence. The kind of silence that makes your ears ache. I unzipped the tent a crack, peering out into silver moonlight. For a second, I swore I saw a shape shift. Between the trees, too tall for a raccoon, too quiet for a bear. Bears grunt, they sniff, they make themselves known. This felt different, lighter, purposeful, human. Morning came cold. I rushed through packing. Noodles half cooked, coffee barely warm, everything shoved haphazardly into my pack. I decided to push deeper into the forest, reasoning that the farther I went, the less chance anyone would bother me. That afternoon I found another clearing, moss blanketing old stones arranged in a forgotten fire ring. The rocks blackened as though burned long ago, relics swallowed by time. I sat with jerky in my lap, notebook in hand, writing simple lines about how quiet the woods felt, a quiet so unnatural it seemed alive. As the sun bled out of the sky, I stepped only a short distance away to gather branches for a fire, and that's when I froze. Between the trees stood a figure, still, upright, watching. Too tall for a child, too motionless for a lost hiker. My throat dried instantly. I called out, "Hey," and got nothing back. No wave, no step, no sound. Only the faintest shift, like weight shifting from one leg to the other. I turned slowly, walked back to my clearing, and packed my gear by flashlight. My knife stayed in my hand, my headlamp resting beside me, but I didn't sleep. Every creak, every breath of wind had me sitting upright. At dawn, I moved fast. No coffee, no pause, retracing my path. The trail didn't feel the same. Familiar landmarks seemed shifted, shadows bent in wrong directions, 2 miles from the lot. I stopped cold. The red Subaru was still there, but it wasn't parked where I had first seen it. It was deeper now, wedged strangely between 2 trees, as if someone had driven it off the trail and left it. Dust heavier than before, pine needles layered across the hood. A window cracked open. I circled it slowly. My stomach sank when I looked inside. No stove, no sleeping bag, no gear. The car was empty, except for a single gray air freshener swaying faintly from the rear view and a dark, dried smear staining the back seat fabric. My chest tightened as I turned and bolted down the trail. I didn't stop until I reached my van. It was exactly as I had left it, doors locked, untouched, but the weight in the air hadn't lifted. I started the engine, tires spitting gravel as I drove without a plan, just desperate to leave the trees behind. Hours later, I ended up in a cheap roadside motel, neon buzzing above the office, the clerk behind glass barely looking at me as I gave a fake name and cash. The room smelled of bleach and stale smoke. But I didn't care. I shoved a chair under the knob, knife on the nightstand, and curled up on the stiff bed. Around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of dragging outside. Not branches, not animals, but a slow scrape across asphalt, footsteps heavy. Boots grinding. I crawled to the peephole. My blood ran cold. A man stood outside, turned away, facing the tree line behind the motel. His gray hoodie was soaked dark at the bottom, mud clinging heavy to his boots like he had trudged miles through swamps. He carried no bag, had no car, no flashlight. He didn't move, didn't twitch, just stood there, watching the forest. Minutes passed, 10, maybe more, until finally he turned and disappeared into the darkness. I sat on the floor gripping my knife. Sleep impossible. By sunrise I was gone. I didn't even unlock the chair from the door until I knew the sun was high. I drove until cities swallowed me, until billboards and headlights drowned out silence, until my phone bars returned and I convinced myself for a moment that I wasn't followed. Though deep down I knew I probably was. I never asked about that. Subaru, I never went back, and sometimes, when the night is quiet enough, I wonder if the figure from the woods and the man at the motel were the same. I came across a strange post one late night while scrolling through an old hiking forum, buried so deep in a forgotten thread about abandoned trails that most people would never even notice it. The writing had no capitalization, no structure, just a chaotic stream of words about a cave system hidden somewhere near the Tennessee and North Carolina border. It didn't share coordinates or anything useful, just a handful of blurry photos, one of them showing a rusted chain link fence almost swallowed by vines on a ridge behind what the writer claimed was an abandoned ranger station. The kind of photo that looks fake at first, but then something about it gnaws at you. But it wasn't the photo that stayed with me. It was the very last line of that post. It said, "Turn around if you hear clicking. Don't keep going. I'm serious." That single sentence crawled into my head and refused to leave, like a warning whispered from someone who had seen something no one else was supposed to see. At first, I saved the post just because it was odd, a curiosity, but as days went by I kept returning to it, reading it again and again, imagining whether it was just an internet story or if there was truth behind those words. By June, curiosity had already sunk its teeth into me and refused to let go. I had a week off work, no plans, so I decided to find it for myself. I packed everything I thought I might need. A headlamp, a backup flashlight, a knife, string, food, a bivy sack. The essentials of someone preparing for more than just a casual hike. Then I drove 6 hours straight into the mountains until I was off the grid. I set camp near a fire road. My phone useless without signal, just me, the woods, and silence. The next morning I followed the directions written in that messy post. First came 2 birch trees that split at the base like a wishbone, then a fork in a shallow creek where I followed the left path, and finally, a slope shaped like a horseshoe. And there it was, the ranger station, hidden and rotting. It looked half swallowed by the forest. Its roof sagging, the door hanging on by a splinter, shattered glass in the window frames. Leaning against the wall was a faded wooden sign that read, Crow Hill Ranger Outpost, a place I had never seen mentioned on any map, official or otherwise. Behind the collapsed station, past moss-covered boulders, I saw it. The same fence from the photo, rusted, overgrown, bent outward at the bottom as if something had crawled through. So I followed, squeezing under and stepping onto a faint trail, barely visible unless you were truly searching for it. The climb took almost 40 minutes, and the deeper I went, the quieter the forest became. No birds, no buzzing insects, nothing. Only the sound of my boots crunching leaves and my own breathing. It was as if the entire forest had been muted. Finally, I reached the ridge and spotted it. A narrow crack in the limestone, hardly wide enough for me to slip through. I turned sideways, scraped my backpack against the edges, and stepped inside. Instantly the air changed, colder, damp, thick with the taste of minerals and stone. I tied one end of my spool of string to a rock near the entrance, a basic safety measure in cave exploration, then turned on my headlamp and followed the passage as it twisted downwards. After a few bends, daylight disappeared entirely, swallowed by the darkness. After 20 minutes of careful steps, I reached a chamber. My light swept across the walls and froze me in place. The stone was carved, spirals, stick-like figures, gouges etched deep into the walls. But these weren't simple drawings. They looked wrong, distorted, arms stretched unnaturally long, heads missing, circles for faces. One figure appeared to be holding its hands toward another. Smaller figure, as if trying to record a story or a warning. The carvings felt ancient, desperate, not art but memory. I pulled out my phone, planning to take a photo, but as I raised it, my headlamp flickered. For a moment I stood in darkness, my stomach dropping. Then it steadied again. I turned, ready to retrace my path. That's when I heard it. A sound echoed faintly through the tunnel. Click, click, sharp, deliberate. Not water, not rock. There was rhythm to it, a pattern that made my skin crawl. I froze, every muscle tight, gripping the string, slowly backing toward the entrance, when suddenly the string in my hand jerked violently, yanked from the other side. As if something had grabbed it, I dropped it immediately, heart hammering in my chest. The clicking stopped. Silence pressed down on me. Then I saw it. Movement low to the ground, a blur of pale skin and unnaturally long fingers slipping around a corner. It was gone in an instant, but that glimpse was enough to tell me I wasn't alone. Panic took over. I ran, my light bouncing wildly across the jagged walls. Every slope felt steeper, every turn tighter, until I slipped, crashing hard onto my side and sliding down a rocky incline. My flashlight flew from my hand and skittered across the stone. I crawled, grabbed it, and flicked it back on, trembling. I realized I had slid into another chamber, smaller, no visible way out. That's when the clicking returned, louder now, closer. My beam shook as I aimed it toward the tunnel, and it emerged. Crawling, its limbs bent in impossible ways, elbows and knees pointing the wrong direction. Its skin pale and stretched tight like paper over bone. Its face smooth, no eyes, no nose. Just featureless skin with a thin slit where a mouth should have been. In its hands it held two black stones, clicking them together in an eerie rhythm. Click, click, click. Then it froze, tilted its head as if studying me, dropped the stones. And the cave itself seemed to scream. The sound didn't come from its mouth. It came from everywhere, metallic and bone-rattling. A shriek that made the walls vibrate and my chest ache. My light went out. I didn't think. I didn't breathe. I just ran. Arms stretched out, clawing through tight gaps, scrambling up jagged slopes, shredding my palms, bruising my knees, but never stopping. After what felt like hours, I saw it. A faint line of daylight ahead. I forced myself through the crack and fell onto the ridge outside, gasping, my body shaking. I didn't stop until I reached the fire road. Collapsed beside my car and lay there, listening, waiting. Finally, I drove home. But when I searched for that post again, it was gone, deleted completely, no trace of it. The ranger station. The carvings, the warnings, none of it exists in any official records. But I know what I saw. And if you ever stumble across a crack in the stone near that border, and you hear clicking in the dark, turn back, because some places are not meant for people to walk into. Last October, I agreed to house-sit for my cousin Jason, while he and his girlfriend went on a 2-week hiking trip in Colorado. They had been planning the trip for months, and when their original house-sitter canceled at the last minute, Jason called me. He told me it would be easy, just watch the cabin, feed the dogs, and enjoy the peace and quiet. At the time I was 27 years old, broke, out of work, and back in my parents' basement with no real plan for the future, so the chance to spend 2 weeks in a quiet mountain cabin with no obligations sounded like the perfect escape I desperately needed. Jason and Kayla lived way out in the Blue Ridge stretch of the Appalachian Mountains, near a tiny place called Clarksville. It was the kind of town you would miss unless someone told you it was there. Their cabin sat 20 minutes outside of town, tucked back behind gravel roads, twisting switchbacks and miles of trees. By the time you reached it, your phone lost signal completely. The place almost seemed cut off from the world when I pulled up. Jason was outside with his two dogs, Sophie and Tank. Sophie was an old golden retriever, lazy and slow, her fur graying and her eyes tired. Tank was younger, a husky mix full of energy, always staring at you like he was studying every move you made. Jason handed me a sheet of paper with all the important information: the Wi-Fi password, the door codes, feeding times for the dogs, and backup instructions for the cabin. Then before he left, he pointed around the side of the cabin and said, "If the power goes out, the breaker is in the basement. You'll need to get to it through the storm doors out back." I paused and said, "Wait, I thought this place was built on a slab." Jason gave me a strange look, almost annoyed that I asked. He said, "No, it's dug in, but don't spend time down there. The foundation is old, damp, not a place to hang out. Just flip the switch and get back upstairs." As he was walking toward the car, he turned back and added one more thing: "If you go for a walk, stay on the road. Do not go into the woods. Some people around here don't like strangers wandering." His tone was sharp enough that I believed him. The first few days went by peacefully. I woke up late, fed the dogs, cooked pasta, and finally opened books I had not touched in years. The cabin was cozy, a little musty, but it had a charm. It felt like the walls carried secrets, stories from years before. The windows were huge, and during the day, sunlight would cut through the woods and paint the cabin walls in shifting patterns. But the silence was strange. During the day, there were no birds, no crickets, nothing but the occasional creak from the house. At night, it was worse. The kind of silence that pressed in on you. Complete, suffocating silence. Sometimes I would snap my fingers just to remind myself that sound still existed. The dogs noticed it too. They never barked. They just lay still with their ears twitching, as if they could hear something I could not. On the fourth night, while I was halfway through an old movie, the lights went out. It was not a flicker, not a gradual loss of power. It was a single soft click, like someone had flipped a switch in another room. The entire cabin dropped into darkness. I waited a full minute, thinking the power would return. But nothing happened, so I grabbed the flashlight, pulled on my boots, and went out back toward the storm doors. The doors were heavy, made of rusting metal with thick hinges that groaned loudly when I pulled them open. The stone steps leading down were damp and slick with moss. I held the flashlight low to watch my footing, but halfway down, I heard something crunch under my boot. I aimed the beam down and froze. It was a small, dry bone. I brushed away leaves and found more scattered ribs, tiny vertebrae, even a jawbone stripped clean. The breaker box looked fine. I flipped the main switch off and on again, but the power stayed out. As I stood there in the damp silence, the dogs exploded into barking upstairs. Not playful barking, not curious barking, but deep, violent snarls that shook the cabin. Tank sounded like he was ready to tear something apart. My heart pounded as I bolted up the steps, slipping on the moss, and rushed inside. Both dogs were pressed against the sliding glass door. Sophie, stiff with fear. Tank snarling so hard his teeth glistened. Their fur stood on end. Every muscle tense. I raised the flashlight toward the door and froze. Two greasy handprints were pressed against the outside glass. Not smears, but perfect clear handprints. They were small, low to the ground, shaped like a child's hands, but wrong. Each had 4 long fingers, no thumbs at all. I stepped back, stomach twisting, ears pounding with my own heartbeat. Tank's growl rumbled deeper. Sophie whimpered and did not move. I cracked the door open an inch and shouted, "Who's out there?" Silence. Just the black wall of trees swaying in the night wind. I stepped onto the porch, swept the light left and right. For a moment, the beam flickered. I smacked it against my palm until it steadied. But the woods remained empty. I locked the door tight, dragged a chair into the hallway, and sat facing the back door with a kitchen knife in my lap. Waiting, I did not sleep at all. By morning, the prints were gone. Not faded, not smudged, gone. Completely. The glass was spotless, shining as if it had been scrubbed clean. I called Jason, told him everything. His voice went flat, almost rehearsed. He said, "Sometimes locals mess with people. It's nothing. If they meant harm, they would have done it already." His calmness made my skin crawl. That night I kept the lights off, armed with a flashlight and a thermos of tea. Around 11:30, I heard tapping on the roof. Light random thumps, not rain, but like pebbles being tossed from different angles. I stepped outside and aimed the flashlight upward. Just for a moment, I saw something move, quick and small, pulling back over the edge of the roof. Then I heard it, a whisper, high-pitched, soft, stretching my name like it was learning how to say it, testing the sound. It dragged the syllables out. Wrong, unsettling. I slammed the door, locked it, and sat in the hallway again. The dogs did not bark this time. They whimpered, ears flat. Sophie crawled under the table. Tank refused to move from the pantry, staring, growling low. The next morning, I climbed up to check the roof. More handprints, the same size, the same. 4 fingers, no thumbs. That was enough for me. I packed everything fast. Threw dog food in the bag, loaded Sophie and Tank into the truck, and was ready to drive. But before leaving, I went back for my charger. That is when Tank froze in front of the pantry. Lips curled, growling hard. Sophie whimpered and refused to leave from under the table. I tapped the wall behind the pantry. It sounded hollow, crouching low. I saw a small crawl space hatch beneath the shelves. I pulled the shelf aside, opened the hatch, and shined the flashlight in. The beam barely reached the back, but what I saw made me shiver. Hundreds of scratches covered the floorboards. Thin, shallow grooves like tiny fingers had scraped the wood over and over again. The edges of the wood looked chewed, clawed at endlessly. I slammed it shut, grabbed my phone, and called Jason. I said, "I'm leaving. Something is wrong here." His voice was calm again, too calm. He just asked, "Before you go, can you check the far corner of the crawl space? I left some traps there last winter." "No," I said firmly. "I am not opening that again." He did not argue. And I did not wait another second. That night, I drove 20 miles out and stayed in a cheap motel off the highway. I dragged both dogs onto the Vaigua bed with me, shoved a chair under the doorknob, and waited for morning to come. I am Jamie. I was 24 when I went on my first solo hike through the Blue Hollow Range near the Tennessee-Georgia border. It was not some dramatic life choice or a journey for peace like people often say. I was not chasing enlightenment. I was not running from demons. I had just been laid off from a job I never even liked. An office gig so dull that the highlight of my day was watching the coffee machine clog. I did not want to answer questions or fake a smile like I was fine, so I packed a bag and left town. I carried just enough food for a few days, a tent, a cheap burner phone I had bought at a gas station, an old GPS that looked like it belonged in a pawn shop, and a faded paper map I had printed from a hiking forum. Out there was no cell signal. And to me at that time, that felt like a blessing. The first night was peaceful. I set up camp near a stream with enough space to hang my hammock between 2 trees, cooked some pathetic-looking ramen on my tiny stove, and listened to frogs making strange clicking noises while I stared into the water. A few cracks echoed from the woods, twigs snapping, something shifting through the underbrush. But that felt normal, not threatening. It was the first time I had experienced silence that felt alive instead of empty. The next morning I continued, and about 6 miles in I noticed an old path curling off to the left, mostly buried in brush and undergrowth, but still passable. I cannot say what made me turn. Maybe boredom, maybe curiosity, but I did. The path wound deeper into a denser stretch of forest where the trees grew so close together, the sunlight barely made it through. The trail markers disappeared, and the air itself felt still, like nothing had passed through in years that was. When I saw it, a collapsed structure sitting off the side of the path, shaped like a cabin but broken and sunken into the earth. It looked abandoned for decades, one side swallowed by the ground. The roof collapsed inward like a crushed box. Maybe 10 by 10 feet at most. No doors, just a hole where one had once been. And the windows nothing more than jagged gaps where the frames had rotted away. Inside, half buried in dirt beside an overturned rusted stove, was a Polaroid I wiped. It clean and looked closer. The photo showed a shirtless man standing in front of the very same cabin. The angle of the shot, the crooked roofline in the background, it all matched perfectly. The photo was old and faded, but his face was strangely sharp. His eyes were blank, unfocused, like he was not even aware of being photographed. His expression was nothing, just a void. I turned it over, no date, no name, nothing. The unease crept over me, not quite fear, but the feeling of intruding on something private. I did not go inside. I just snapped a picture of the cabin with my phone, slipped the Polaroid into my pocket, and kept moving. By late afternoon, I found a camp spot uphill from the cabin, 50 or 60 yards away. I picked it on purpose because the trees blocked any view of where I had come from. I remember thinking to myself, if I cannot see it, it cannot see me. That night was different. I had trouble sleeping, not because of noise, but because of the silence. It was the kind of silence that is heavy. No crickets, no wind, just the deep forest emptiness that makes you feel like the last person alive around. 2 in the morning, I woke suddenly, like something had snapped me out of sleep. I lay still in the hammock, and that was when I felt it move, not from wind, but as if someone had walked past and brushed against it. The hammock swayed once, then stopped. I stayed frozen, slowly reached for my flashlight, flicked it on. Nothing, no sound, no movement. Just as I began to breathe again, I heard it. Branches snapping downhill, not close, not far, but near enough to matter. Then silence, then a dry cough, faint but real, like someone trying to clear their throat quietly. It came from the direction of the cabin. I did not sleep again. By morning, I spotted it. A footprint in the dirt, only a few feet from my hammock. It was barefoot, wide, with long, thick toes, one perfect print, as if whoever it was had just stood there, watching. I packed fast, did not even eat. I started toward the loop trail, but the woods had changed. There were no birds, no buzzing insects, not even a breeze through the trees. The forest felt dead. That was when I noticed the carvings, at first just rough lines slashed into bark, then spirals, twisted crosses, and strange symbols, deliberate, old, and wrong. Then I saw a tree with a face carved into it, long oval eyes, mouth stretched downward. It was too detailed. Someone had spent time on it, too much time. I raised my phone to take a picture, and that was when I saw him, behind the next tree, standing still as stone, his skin pale like wax, his body bare, and his face blank. Staring directly at me, he did not blink, did not move. It was the same man from the photo. I do not remember deciding to run, but I did. Full speed, my chest burning. No sense of direction, just raw panic. I dove behind a fallen log and crouched there, shaking. For minutes I heard nothing, no footsteps, no breath, just silence. When I finally moved again, I went west with my compass, away from the trail, desperate for a road or any sign of people. Around midday, I stumbled into a clearing and froze. Another cabin stood there, but this one was different. It looked lived in, roof intact, tools scattered on a table outside, animal hides strung up across a line. Then I smelled it. A thick, greasy scent of burned meat hanging heavy in the air. Smoke curled from a metal drum near the porch. My stomach twisted as I crept closer. I lifted the lid just enough to see inside. Bones, charred black, and not shaped like any deer or bear. These were wrong, human wrong, The cabin door creaked. I did not wait. I bolted, tearing through brush and rock until I reached a ridge. My lungs burning, my legs numb. Still I heard nothing behind me. Just that wrong silence. Night fell, and I found a hunting stand nailed into a tree. I climbed it and huddled on the tiny platform 30 feet above the ground, clutching my coat tight. Around midnight, footsteps began, slow, deliberate, crunching through the leaves. A voice followed, low and flat, calling my name, Jamie. My blood froze. Then the ladder creaked, step by step. Something climbing up toward me. I gripped my knife, hands shaking so violently I almost dropped it. When the figure reached the top, I kicked with everything I had. My boot slammed into his chest. The man fell backward, hit the ground hard. Silence followed. I jumped from the back of the stand, twisted my ankle badly when I landed, but I did not stop. I crawled and limped through the forest until I finally saw headlights. A truck rolling down a dirt road. I stumbled into its path. The driver stopped yelling. I collapsed by the bumper. He asked if someone was chasing me. I nodded, but I never mentioned the Polaroid. The next morning, I burned it without even looking at it again.